Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Joshua P. Hill, who is an activist and community organizer, as well as a political commentator and writer at the New Means Substack. We chat a lot about the Zohran Mamdani New York City Democratic primary win, how surprising it was, how insurmountable it was, and how he came back from 2% in January all the way to handedly winning over Cuomo, and Cuomo conceding the day of the election when a lot of people thought it would go over a week long or things of that nature due to ranked choice voting. So we talk about that, the organizing behind it, the implications nationwide, the responses from the Democratic establishment as well as the right wingers, and what it can really mean for people going forward. Is this could maybe be a flashpoint for politics in the electoral sphere going into the future with other elections and mass movements and organizing as well. We talk about the escalating forever wars that continue to flourish with Iran, Israel, and the United States, and just sort of the lack of an anti-war space within the opposition party, the Democrats, and just Joshua's thoughts on it as well as my own. We get into that. We get into the ongoing violence in Gaza, especially when it comes to the distribution areas of the, quote, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and kind of the implications of how all these topics we're talking about are connected and in conjunction with each other when it comes to dehumanization. We talk about all that and more. It was great to have Joshua P. Hill again on for a second time, returning guest. The first time we talked was back on Inauguration Day for the Trump second term. I recommend, if you haven't watched that before, to go check that one out. We got a few things wrong. We got a lot right, but it was interesting to kind of connect back and kind of see where things have gone and our thoughts on everything going forward politically and socially, both within these electoral movements, things going on in LA, and everything in between. So definitely go subscribe at New Means to check out all of Joshua's work. Subscribe to the podcast at thepowerlesspod.com. Email me at thepowerlesspod@gmail.com if you want to be on the show. If you want to get me to do any collaborations, if you're a producer, if you're an activist, if you're a journalist, if you're a musician, everything in between. I love to have different people of all walks of life on to talk about a host of different topics or to break down music, things of that nature. I am going to plug a little bit here for the second episode in a row that I am selling these shirts from my band Dead Inside that say, may that riot gear chip and shatter. We are selling these to donate all money to the National Immigration Justice Center to assist those that are facing dehumanization, that are immigrants and migrants in the wake of the Trump administration and ICE raids and abductions and things of that nature. So please consider going to buy those. Those will be in the links below as well. It is deadinsideband.bandcamp.com. So definitely go check that out. It's printed on Champion stuff. It's not cheap attire, and it goes to a good cause. So with all of that, let's check out this episode and this conversation that I had with Joshua P. Hill of New Means on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much.
Here are just some of his plans for New York City. Watch.
And our police force should not be assisting ICE.
Defund the NYPD and refund all of these different social services.
I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce.
I'll freeze the rent for millions of tenants, make buses fast and free, and deliver universal childcare. And before you ask, I'll pay for it by taxing the rich.
The mayor will use their power to reject Donald Trump's fascism.
All right, I'm here for the next episode. I think this is going to be episode 99 of the Powerless Podcast with Joshua P. Hill of New Means. Second time you've been on. Obviously, the first time we talked was back. It was almost like 20 episodes ago, this show with the inauguration. I went back to listen a little bit today just to like remember what we talked about. I don't know. I've like, you do these so often, sometimes you forget exactly what we discussed. And it was like, obviously, the inauguration. And we both were pretty confident that we knew how horrible it was going to be, that it was going to be worse. But we were like, what's coming. That was the thing that I heard us both say a few different times. You're like, what's coming. What's coming. And it's like, well, I think I had to eat my words a little bit after re-listening to that because, like, we were correct. We just were not correct, I think, to the degree of which things have escalated so rapidly. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing that even all of us that were very doomer about things, I think, we're not quite doomer enough. Right? But fortunately, the first thing I had kind of in our agenda to talk about today that would be a bit of rare positive news is, of course, the surprise upset in like epic fashion, I would say, that of Zohran Mamdani, taking the New York City Democratic primary race win pretty handedly, despite all of us hoping that in a week we would hear that he won through ranked choice, right? So before we get into your piece and kind of get into the details and some people's reactions and politicians' reactions and everything in between, and obviously first and foremost what you wrote about it, which I think was great. What was your initial reaction? I know you're in New York. I know you got to vote early and vote in this primary. What was your initial reaction? How surprised were you, and kind of what were your first thoughts when this came to pass on Tuesday night?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who thought I might have, we all might have to wait 5-6 days or whatever, and but yeah, I mean, it was ecstatic. It was, for a bunch of reasons, but one of them being, yeah, we got to hear Cuomo concede at like 11 p.m. or whatever it was, which was awesome. But yeah, I mean, part of the reason the campaign won was this like electric feeling that he and the video people and the volunteers and everybody started generating. And yeah, like you said, it was epic for a lot of reasons. I mean, one of them is back in January, I think a lot of the polls had him at like somewhere between like 2% and 6% or something like that.
Yeah, some of the major ones there was like all basically consensus at 2% in January. I was just looking back today to make sure I had that right, which is insane,
Yeah. Cuomo thought he had it in the bag, and I guess a lot of other people thought Cuomo had it in the bag, but it just, while Zohran and his team ran an amazing campaign, Cuomo ran a shit campaign. And I mean, he never stepped on much. I track some of this stuff, sort of for a living, and just am trying to tune into local politics all day. I don't know, if Cuomo had one big rally, I didn't even see it. Felt like he didn't step outside. So yeah, the contrast and the way it paid off is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was, of course, like this is anecdotal, but I thought it was pretty iconic. I think it was the day of, if not the day before the election, of Mamdani being on the street with someone wearing a Cuomo shirt, being paid to canvass, and the guy's hugging Mamdani and making it pretty clear he's likely going to vote for him himself. This was like a way to get a couple of bucks, right?
Yeah.
Like that alone, I do think, like, and we'll get into this a little more in detail, but I do think like Mamdani ran a spectacular campaign for a number of reasons that you detail. But I think it's also worth noting, as you just said, that Cuomo ran a horrifically, like singularly horrific campaign, to where, like, I'm not diminishing Mamdani at all, but like Cuomo really gave an assist in that, like, they pour in all this money. First of all, I don't know how much of an assist it was of the strategy and just like the pick of the candidate that people threw money to, because so I think outside influences or the disconnected billionaires that live in some high rise that are totally disconnected, if not even not in New York at all, don't get that. Not everybody, as much as like Americans have goldfish brains, Cuomo's not someone in New York that people are going to be flippantly and quick to dismiss, right? Like you saw some people, Jessica Ramos, who's someone that I've tried to like basically ridicule as much as I can online for her position. I think deservedly. It was bizarre. It was bizarre that he was the person picked. Maybe he was the only one willing to run. I don't know. I'm not an insider on that stuff. Yeah. But like, I guess that's the other takeaway. And, you didn't write about this because none of us want to talk about fucking Cuomo. But like what was your sense of that? It seemed very bizarre that he was the choice to fight back against grassroots movements. Like, do people still just think name recognition in this day and age is still going to win? Or what were your thoughts on how bad this was on his end?
Yeah, I think part of it is that in New York, he is the establishment. And so when he made the decision for his own ego, part of the way he did things in his, I think, 10 years as governor, before he stepped down in disgrace, when he made the decision, and he had been so vindictive and so sort of punishing anybody who stood up against him, that there was nobody to tell him no, nobody to stand in his way. And you combine that with the name recognition, and he thought he had it in the bag, I think. And he thought he could coast on his reputation of being governor. I mean, because obviously so much of the reputation had fallen apart, but there's the technical fact that he checks the box of having experience, and sort of hoping everybody sets aside what exactly he has experience doing or what exactly he did with that tenure. But yeah, it was really, it made him he is the embodiment of the establishment here in New York, and it became a perfect foil for Zohran in the campaign. a real upstart versus the establishment narrative, which is, it's a narrative and it's also just the truth of what the campaign was trying to do and what they're aiming for and what they're about.
Yeah. I thought it was just like, I don't know, as someone that pays attention to this stuff, but is also completely disillusioned as someone that's like, very much followed in Illinois, you can follow the Chicago machine so much of like very similar people to Cuomo. Maybe they don't have like sexual misconduct
Not all
allegations,
of them.
but yeah, not all of them, or it's not all public. There's a lot of NDAs or something.
Yeah.
But like there's that same kind of element where, like, at least in Chicago, there's not really going to be, there's been Republican governors, I guess, like in contrast to Cuomo, but you're not going to find Republican strength in Chicago, right? Kind of like in New York, you might get some state reps, or you might get some House of Representative people. You'd be hard pressed to get a senator that's a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, or a mayor for sure. But that just means that you can create Republican Democrats, right? And and that's kind of like what was interesting about this so much, was that, like, we had so many people. I named off Ramos, but there was Clyburn, that is like a big tenant within the Democratic establishment. There's so many other different people.
Bill Clinton,
Sex Pests Unite kind of deal, and other ones that stayed silent. I didn't like. I was gonna share this a little bit later in the podcast, but I don't know. Like, there's Senator Gillibrand, who I don't know if she endorsed Cuomo, but she certainly has been very, very
anti-Mamdani.
Anti-Mamdani. And I think what this did is it really showed how disingenuous a lot of the establishment is, because you had a lot of these people that opportunistically, who should have called out Cuomo for years. But when there was the sexual misconduct allegations building, finally, put out these statements and condemned him and asked him to resign. And that's how he resigned in disgrace. Those same people, you could literally search his name in their like Twitter profiles or whatever and find completely separate, like, it's like the cognitive dissonance of two different, it's like two Jekyll and Hyde almost, of like condemning because they want a virtue signal finally, because it's too much and he has to go. And then at the same time, he had to go then, and he sexually harassed or sexually assaulted or whatever the case may be people, along with like killing everybody's grandpa, right, in nursing homes. But we don't need a socialist, right? Like, I guess, like, we're not surprised by these. I think the level to which people capitulated for a guy that they literally, you can see them literally have public statements about him needing to resign in disgrace. What was your sense of that? Were you surprised at the level of that, or were you like, this is par for the course, that like they will literally do anything to stop like a grassroots movement? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I was a little bit surprised, just because there's some huge chunk of his endorsements were people who had urged him to resign just 4 years ago. The brazenness, the not thinking twice, and not deleting your tweet from 4 years ago where you told him to resign for harassment, and then just coming out and endorsing him. I mean, not to jump ahead, but I think it's almost more shocking that Zohran decisively wins a Democratic primary, and some of these people, like Gillibrand, just went on the radio the other day, I think it was yesterday, spouting racist, Islamophobe, like just George Bush shit. Like, what, you're sounding like those guys about the man who just won the Democratic primary in your, city.
For sure. I just feel compelled to say, we can find no evidence that he has supported Hamas or has supported violent jihad, as that caller was asserting. Can you?
Again, Brian, I don't have all the data and information, and I've never sat down with Mr. Mamdani. So I've asked to have that meeting. I'm going to have that meeting. We will talk through all these things. He can tell me his views of the world, and I can learn them firsthand. I think the reference that I had read was global intifada specifically, which has very serious meanings that are violent and destructive. So
which he says, and I pressed him on this on the show on Monday, but which he says are not calls for violence, because intifada is a much broader term involving all kinds of uprisings and resistance and things like that. So I just want to be clear about how at least he defines it. And maybe he needs to be more clear. I don't mean this, I don't mean that. He did say here that he didn't want to be the word police, even as the mayor of New York, if he's elected. But I do also want to be clear that he said he does not support violent intifada. Is that fair?
So, Brian, I didn't hear your exchange with him, but if I was speaking to him directly, I would simply say that is not how the words are received. And it doesn't matter what meaning you have in your brain. It is not how the word is received. And when you use a word like intifada to many Jewish Americans and Jewish New Yorkers, that means you are permissive for violence against Jews. It is a serious word. It is a word that has deep meaning. It has been used for wars across time and violence and destruction and slaughter and murder against the Jews. It is a harmful, hurtful, inappropriate word for anyone who wants to represent a city as diverse as New York City with 8 million people. And I would be very specific in these words, and I would say you may not use them again if you expect to represent everyone ever again, because they are received as hateful and divisive and harmful, and that's it. So I appreciate that he told you he didn't mean that, and that's great. That's
And
a
I
great
think
place
we
to start.
also clarify, or he was clarifying that he never said globalize the intifada. He was asked in an interview if he would denounce the phrase globalize the intifada. And then that led to this kind of conversation, that you were just referring to, but that he was never out there saying globalize the intifada. He was asked about other people who used it. So just to be precise about what happened there. Yes?
Well, as a leader of a city as diverse as New York City with 8 million people, as the largest Jewish population in the country, he should denounce it. And that's it, period. And you can't celebrate it, you can't value it, you can't lift it up. And that is the challenge that Jewish New Yorkers have had, certainly since October 6th. Since October 7th, it is exactly what they have felt. It is why Jewish students in our universities have felt unsafe. It is why Jewish students have felt that their schools did not have their back and cared about them or their learning, because the people doing these protests use words that have meanings that are far more violent and horrific than they may have intended. But when you hear things like intifada, when you hear things like jihad, when you hear from the river to the sea, it is received as slaughter the Jews and destroy Israel, period. It's how it's received. And if you talk to any group, you talk to our LGBTQ community, you talk to our Black community, you talk to our Hispanic community, there are words and there are imagery and there are things that are said that they will hear it and feel it as a dagger to their throat. And so if you want to be a leader, you have to recognize how these things are felt and received, and saying there should be no word police is irresponsible. Because as a leader, you have to protect everyone, period.
Platform that's like, let's make the most expensive city in the country a little more affordable. Call him a socialist, call him whatever you want. The campaign was very reasonable. He wasn't, whatever his true beliefs are, who knows? I mean, only he knows that, obviously. But the campaign has a platform, and it's a reasonable platform that's like a Bernie Sanders type of lane or something, and yet these establishment Democrats some of them still can't bring themselves to endorse him after he wins. That you're a you're a Democrat who's apparently no longer interested in supporting the Democratic nominee in some of these cases.
Yeah, what happened to the blue no matter who stuff?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
I forget.
That's only when it's a racist or a sex pest or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Or a cop that wants to give more cops and make cop cities. Right? Yeah.
A guy who was a Republican 4 years ago and switches to Democrat, then they say vote blue no matter who.
That's right. That's 100%. That's how you save democracy or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was gonna look it up, but maybe you'd know the name. I forget her name, but there's a younger freshman congressman that just came out, it does definitely take money from AIPAC and things of that nature. Is it Lauren something? I don't remember her last name, but it was in New York. I might be able to find this, and people were like, the kind of like the Democratic angle of people who just think like getting young people in now is like all you have to do, like that type deal. They were sharing this freshman. I'll probably share it on the screen here for the edited version because I'm too stupid to find it while I'm talking. But like she put up the statement that like, I'm holding my endorsement of Mamdani. I have many concerns, yada yada yada. And it's like, and it's like, dude, like what is your end game? You know what I mean? Like, what do you think? Like, how not only is this like bad morally and also politically, it's like on the Democratic Party as a whole, it's literally bad for your own brand. Like, it's literally self-sabotage, and it's just bizarre that these people either can't see it or it's like almost like they're willing to be self-destructive for the people funding them, but it won't matter if you lose your House seat because of like blowback. You know what I mean? It's truly a bizarre situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the classic narrative of they're going to punch harder to the left than they are to the right, or they're the number one priority being stopping somebody who's a couple degrees to the left of, all the other politicians. Yeah, I mean, it's a sad situation where, sometimes it's literally an AIPAC, situation or other funders, like you said, just not wanting to lose that money. But yeah, I think one of the things that they're doing, and maybe this is because they're racist or Islamophobic, but like they're really underestimating Zohran. I mean, he's a good guy from what I can tell, and whatever. I'm not his personal friend. What I do know from a distance is that he's good at politics. He won, not just he came from behind to beat the most well-known politician in New York, or one of them, not just because he got lucky or something. It's because he's good at politics. He wants people to be able to pay rent, but he also is charismatic. He gives a great speech. He walked the whole distance of Manhattan like 2 days before the election because he's smart and good at doing politics. And so I think the more that they put the spotlight on him and the more they try to make him some boogeyman, it's going to come back and bite them in the ass. Like, he's good at this stuff. It's not a coincidence that he just beat Andrew Cuomo in this election.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to kind of the times we're in too, right? We're like several years ago, I think, the Democrats have been a little behind the Republicans overall, in that Republicans aesthetically, it's a way different ballgame because they actually don't have any policies backing it up really. But aesthetically, they have been able to have people win and run on being this anti-establishment, whatever that means for them. Like, it's very bizarre, to kind of dive into.
Yeah, the
but they're
billionaire
able to kind of
anti-establishment.
Yeah. You're anti-establishment as you back every war and back cutting social safety nets and everything else. Democrats, like the party, has not been able to catch up with that. People in general, regardless of their political affiliations, don't like people that have been there for forever. They don't like seeing the people kind of like that they view high up on a hill that have no idea what they're going through and their experience. And I think like you're still seeing that element where people are like, why would you support this guy that's, this 33-year-old immigrant, Muslim state senator, state representative,
state rep,
state rep that is telling you he'll give you free buses or whatever. It's like, it's because he's telling you he's going to make your life better, right? It's not that complicated. That's the thing about his campaign that I've loved, is like you could name off, you can name off the public grocery stores, you can name off rent freezes, you can name off, no fare buses, and kind of streamlining that process to make it quicker for people to use public transportation and expedite that process. And it's like you can name, that's another thing that I thought was important about it, is that you can name off immediately, like someone in rural Illinois that at times isn't like overly plugged in when it comes to races all over the place. New York City mayor is obviously a little bit bigger, but that I can name that off to people immediately. Like, that shows that, like, I don't know, newsflash, you can run on policy. I know there's a lot of like even left-wing commentators and journalists that'll say, like, in America, you can't, people don't vote on policy, they vote on vibes. It's like part of that's true, but if you can have the vibes and back it up with very coherent policies that people will respond to, right?
Yeah, and I mean, of all his policies added up to something. He wasn't doing the like, you'll get 3 to 5 years of debt relief if you sign up for this public, government, whatever. He was just like, affordability. Everybody, it's policies that's right there where the people are at. Like, it's New York City. Everybody's talking about rent. Everybody's thinking about rent. Everybody's worried that the rent's going to go up next year. And I'm sure it's true everywhere, but in New York, it's just on our minds, on people's minds. The subway's on people's minds, the buses, like, it's just, he's going right to where people are at, not trying to do some tax lean incentive structure. Small
Can't
business
explain
owners,
in a video or something. Yeah,
exactly. I remember a video he did like 3 months ago. That's crazy. I don't, why would I remember some political candidate video from months ago? But it's just because the caption was "freeze the rent," and it's like, I mean, it's like 2 million tenants are in the like rent stabilized and rent control programs here. And Eric Adams, the board he appoints, keeps jacking that rent up. The mayor has the ability. It's very direct. The mayor appoints this board and then they raise it or they can freeze it. And so he's just being really clear, really direct, meeting people right where they are. And, there is a vibe. The campaign had this vibe and this energy, but it was very much tied into the like, these policies that were the word they're like exciting. They, and they're not exciting because they're like crazy, radical. They're exciting just because like, this is actually what I want. It's finally a politician who's actually just saying the stuff we want to hear. maybe he won't be able to do 100% of everything. But he's going to try, and he's shifted the paradigm. He just shifted he did it unlike any other Democrat that I've seen in a long time, especially in New York, where there's it's Chuck Schumer, it's Hakeem Jeffries, it's these establishment, the machine in Brooklyn, especially Eric Adams came out of the Brooklyn machine. Zohran's clearly doing something different than all these other guys. And we felt it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I heard some people, some other people I know from New York, they're like, we thought that, kind of the biggest thing we'd seen in a long time was when Crowley lost to AOC back in 2018. And this feels like that on steroids, right? Like this
it does, yeah.
So
citywide versus that one district. And the sheer, 65,000 people volunteered or something. Unreal
over
numbers.
1 million doors knocked. Yeah,
I couldn't walk through my neighborhood without seeing somebody for the last couple of weeks. Not even just at the polling and the early voting locations, just busy street corners. They just be posted up, handing out lit, talking to people, having obviously door knocking too. And you probably saw some of the pictures. Some of these canvases got to be I don't know, 100, 150 people. It's some gigantic. Everybody knew somebody. Everybody. If they weren't door knocking, they were making a TikTok, or they were posting, or they were rocking a shirt or a pin. It just it got in the water. It got infectious in a good way, in the best way.
That also, in contrast to that, I watched a little bit of a video of right after Cuomo conceded. Right before then, a few days later, he says he's going to run independently in the general, which of course, to the surprise of no one, right? But there it was an interview, I think on CNN or some legacy media outlet, where they asked the reporter, and they're like, "Are all the people behind you, are they volunteers?" She was like, "Well, they supported him through donations." And it was that kind of thing where it's nobody there had volunteered, done any ground game, done any sort of social media stuff, done anything. It was literally these are all the millionaires that donated and then just watched this flop. And it was exceedingly funny to me that Cuomo asked them all to applaud Mamdani for his win, and there was a few claps, and then it was over, and it was a completely seething defeat. And it's that's the kind of different, it's almost like a cartoon how much the difference was in that sort of dichotomy, that kind of separation, you know what I mean?
No, Robin Hood versus the king or the fat cat or whatever. It's just so it's two stereotypes. And the upstart, David Goliath, it really did have that feel. And that's part of the excitement, is that we all know, just in this country, how often do you see the little guy actually win? And of course now they're about to, some of these billionaires want to pour unbelievable amounts of money into the next round. I don't think they can pull it off. I think they're screwed, and some of them know it. Some of the people were I think some of Cuomo's own people are telling him not to run because they don't want him to get embarrassed again. And he might be, his ego, obviously, so much of this is about his ego. But there's something different happening. And I sort of what I wrote about, and what I don't think one election is going to change everything, but in this city or anywhere, if all these people who got excited and mobilized and, energized, if those people start to see themselves as organizers and as, whether it's DSA or whether it's another avenue, that to me is the real, I want universal childcare. I want this stuff that could make our lives better, but to see it through and to fight off the billionaire attacks and to fight off the establishment, blowback, I think there's an army of volunteers, and if 50,000 people really commit to seeing this through, it's going to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was going to get to. So you kind of already, but that was one thing I took away most from your piece on this. Again, for people who want to check it out, it'll be in the show notes below. But the Socialist Republic of NYC, which I love the title of that, just
I was
totally digging it in. Yeah. But them talking about that, or you talking about that, regardless, worst case scenario, the machine comes out, it does something that really seems like it could be and I'm just so skeptical of feeling hopeful that you just have these thoughts, right?
Hard.
But even with that in mind, it's worst case scenario, this has galvanized a bunch of people. for maybe the first time. We know that because the electorate turned out, I forget which specific areas, but some electorate percentages completely flipped on their head because of how they ran this campaign. And they did the thing that people have been talking about for forever, which is stop trying to get the ever elusive imaginary moderate Republican and get people that don't vote to vote, right? And that's galvanizing people. It's getting people organized. It's talking to people that are apolitical or so like black pill, basically, that they are out of the system, don't care about it, understandably. And like what I liked what you talked about is, regardless, this has gotten people their first taste of what it's like to build a mass movement, to build a grassroots movement that's completely outside of the framework of how a lot of people view politics. And I guess like when you see, you kind of already gave your thoughts on this a little bit, but like when you see that, what are your takeaways, whether, things that you've seen from people on the ground or people that you've seen galvanized for the first time? Like what is the uptick of that outside of this election overall, from your perspective?
Yeah, outside of the election, that's a great question. I think that we're so used to electing people or losing, good or bad, whoever wins the elections, and we're sort of like trained basically to say, okay, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, I'll try again. And when people view themselves as organizers rather than just voters, you don't have that reaction. If something doesn't go your way, if Cuomo does something crazy and with $800 million and wins in November or something, there's at least a couple thousand of those people who are not going to say, I'm waiting another 4 years. They're going to say, okay, now I know a little bit about how to fight. Now I know a little bit about how to build power, how to organize with people, how to talk to my neighbors, canvas. And so I'm in the fight, and I have tools to be in that fight. And I have an organization, a lot of other people to fight alongside, and not just wait till the next time I can mark my ballot. And that's what I hope for. I mean, there's so many different fights in New York. There's, it's 8 million people, and so Eric Adams might successfully fund the police. He might, he's done a lot, but the whole time there's been people fighting. When Adams ramped up the homeless sweeps, there were dozens, hundreds, sometimes people at these sweeps trying to resist, trying to save people's property, trying to form a barricade and block, the cops and sanitation sometimes from taking people's tents and stuff. And so there's these constant fights. There's, every neighborhood has its battles, often, against landlords, police, whoever it might be. And so I'm hoping, and it's not guaranteed, but I'm hoping that a lot of people view themselves as in this fight. And sometimes it's parasocial. Sometimes maybe they just want to fight for Zohran at the moment. But he's pretty clear about the Bernie, the not me, us sort of thing. And so I'm hoping that really translates to something bigger.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like seeing the level of organization, DSA is such a broad organization nationally that, it can be very different from one area to the next. But the way that the NYC chapter, not just them, but, just volunteers out and about have done this has been like truly inspiring to see. Again, everyone, I think, since January, if not farther back, as you and I know from following politics during the Biden administration and before as well, like everyone can feel so cynical, so demoralized, and oftentimes you can feel like you should stay home and fuck it all, basically. And to see the complete antithesis of that was probably my favorite part of all this,
Yeah.
And all of us, seeing everyone from like, seeing people in Switzerland and people that I've seen from different countries in Africa, and seeing people in different parts of Europe and Asia that are like literally commenting about how much they're stoked for New York City for this is like just kind of a special thing that I think was we don't get to see very often at all in this day and age in the United States,
Yeah. I mean, I was talking with a friend who's like, we don't want to say too much that New York's the greatest city in the world or something, but we recognize that it is a center point of finance and media, and that like there's these ripple effects that are real and big. And Giuliani has his stupid weird career, but people can be placed on the world stage by being the mayor of New York. And so the fact that it was this town of all, this city of all places where this sort of insurgent campaign really took off, yeah, I think there's a lot of gratitude that beyond just this city, like I think a lot of people are excited for the message it can send for people who are trying to organize anywhere, really. That, yeah, there's just a way. It's easy to think that there's a way things are done, and that's the way it's done, and that's the way it's going to be. Just to see that a campaign can be run another way, it could have different priorities, and that it can grow out. I mean, Zohran really did come through like the DSA ranks. Before he became a DSA elected official, he was helping run another guy's campaign, volunteered, he's done community organizing, he's gotten arrested at protests alongside DSA people. Like, he did a hunger strike with New York cab drivers. He paid his dues in a lot of ways. And I'm, again, not my personal friend. I'm sure he's flawed like everybody else. But just to say, it's a different way of doing things. Cuomo is the perfect example of the opposite, in that everything he got because his dad was a beloved governor, and for what I understand, a much better governor than him.
Yeah.
He really won on the name recognition. He got his career on the Rolodex and the name recognition from his dad and everything. And how many elections at the presidential level? We got Obama's, Clinton's, Bush's. Like, yeah, to defeat it's a more local dynasty, but still to defeat that and to say, yeah, maybe the way we should choose politicians isn't based on their last name.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's one of the many things we should be moving past.
Yeah, one can hope. And one last thing on this before we probably move on to one of your other pieces of the topic that's unfortunately the complete antithesis of a positive when we talk about the endless wars and things going on. But I think like a lot of the Democratic establishment and the Cuomo adjacent people of the world need to just simply look at all the people they're supposedly supposed to be fighting against, like not just right-wing politicians that are literally calling now to try to denaturalize Mamdani and try to deport him because he won a primary, to people like, everyone from like the Charlie Kirks and Laura Loomers of the world that are literally sharing pictures of 9/11 and just like the most racist, Islamophobic shit I've seen in quite a while. And that's saying something.
Yeah.
Because we've been seeing that since October 7th on steroids and before, obviously, with the war on terror. The fact that like those people are all just as upset as these establishment people, while maybe they're saying more outlandish things, it's like, where is your self-reflection? You know what I mean? Where is your head at? Where's your head at in the game that's going on right now? You try to claim, they try to claim everything from being mad that like the war powers resolutions haven't gone through to where Congress has power to the war, when it really seems like all of them would sign off with, this kind of transitioning. This is my halfway transition here, I guess. Like, they would there'd be enough votes from Democrats for them to likely go through with war in Iran against Iran in the first place, to talking about ICE and just talking about due process and not talking about actual human dignity and all these different things. Like, but they're still saying that those things are existential, while still basically being on the side of these people in a very, very clear and succinct way. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's another big takeaway I hope that people don't sleep on, because it's like, no, we're not all aligned in this like, sort of left liberal space. There are a lot of really, really disgusting bad actors, whether it's for self-serving purposes or maybe they truly support these horrific things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it was an eye-opening experience on like Wednesday to see, like you said, Gillibrand, which I'm going to throw that video in here somewhere because I think people need to see that, along with like the Charlie Kirks of the world, basically all being aligned in the same stuff, maybe using different forms of language, but saying the exact same thing.
Yeah. I mean, Gillibrand wasn't too far from.
And to the credit of that host, I wasn't familiar with that radio host, but he several times, to his credit, was like, just so you know, that's not what he said. He didn't even say this.
Yeah.
And also, this is what he was saying about policing language. And then she just fucking continues on with it. And it's like, you've taken almost $1 million from the AIPAC lobby and other adjacent lobbies. So it's like, are we surprised? But it's so fucking disgusting,
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad it was a local news host, because one of the things I was talking about with a friend and somebody I organized with earlier today is like, this is New York City. The people who actually, Gillibrand doesn't even live here, I don't think. I think she lives upstate. But the people who actually live here, obviously I'm not scared of Muslims. I walk down the street and I see, they live on my block, and I mean, I'm Jewish, and I see Jews who are way more religious than me, Orthodox Jews. I see a woman in a hijab, and it's like, this is New York City. I mean, probably people from every single country on earth live here, immigrants from I don't know, 90 to 190. I don't know how many languages are spoken here. It's just the idea that, so I'm glad it was a local radio host who seems to be much more aligned with your average New Yorker than this senator. Because, I mean, she, again, the self-reflection thing is like, I wish we could give them a dose of that, because one day they're talking about fighting fascism and the next day they're saying, the clean version of what Laura Loomer said. And it's like, you two seem a lot closer. You two seem really close. And I think I'm on the other end of some spectrum. And I really think, you mentioned this earlier, and I'm glad you said it, which is one of the many things that the Zohran campaign seems to indicate is like, instead of a campaign searching for some voter who is sort of mythically, magically in the middle on everything, it's like, most people aren't in the middle on like bigotry. Especially in New York City, most people aren't in some they're not in the middle when it comes to like being racist. They're like, people are on the left, and on racism, the left is, I'm just saying, not being racist. Most people are not going to fall for some like bigoted message these days, especially in this city. And it's when the Democrats and the establishment and the Republican establishment are united on that, people are going to vote for the outsider. Because, people want something different in 10 different ways. There's a lot of ways in which we're searching for something new and different. And Zohran chose to lean into that instead of trying to, moderate all his views on everything so that, the liberal hedge fund manager or some whatever is going to vote for him. He just said, I'm going to go to where the people are at, which is affordability, not bigoted, not full of the stereotypes that apparently are in the minds of like most of the Democratic establishment and all the Republican establishment. So like you said also earlier, this starts getting us into some of the less pleasant territory.
Yeah, and I think it's all really connected to like something I talked to I've been talking to more and more people kind of in my real life of like this very conservative rural area that I'm at about this idea of like your politics so much being vetted into dehumanization, right? Like at the crux of so many things, you can narrow it down to dehumanization, whether it's ICE raids, whether it's the condemnation of people sticking up for their own community in response to something like an ICE raid or something like that, or Palestinian liberation, or war in the Middle East affecting thousands and thousands of lives. And we've seen that from these people that tried to they have been like, this is why it is connected, like they've been trying to connect this campaign in a lot of ways to what's been going on. The fact that like whether it's a debate or someone or him being on TV, the fact that the New York City mayor is having to explain their position on Israel over and over again. It really shows where the politics are and where the dehumanization, also where like the dehumanization of your own constituents is, that you're not even talking about that, right?
They're secondary.
Yeah, they're at best they're secondary, right? And so that kind of goes to what you wrote about. This would have come out last week if I do my math right, about no more endless war, no more endless violence. You were talking at the time, I don't think when you put this out, maybe Trump had done the bombings in Iran, or maybe it was
right
a little before,
the day after, maybe.
Yeah. And just seeing this and going through it, I guess a little bit, like overall, we're obviously talking a lot about kind of the bipartisan agreement on dehumanizing and talking about like the greatest evil in the world of being the country of Iran, yet kind of totally changing the narrative on how conflict starts, what the role of the United States should be, and everything in between. So with everything that's been going on, and this is likely going to come out today, and even by the time we're done recording this, like, and editing and putting it out, things can change. You never know with how this stuff's been going. But just like, what has your sense been of all of this? And I always like to look at it more from like, what have you seen, I guess, from like the opposition party, right? Because we know Republicans are going to do what Republicans do. We know that Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do. But we're seeing a stark failure to come to the moment from the opposition party, from everyone from Hakeem Jeffries to Chuck Schumer to so many different people. I think, like Thomas Massey is the person trying to propose war power resolutions,
he really has
right?
become the lightning rod, the one that the leader of the opposition to some of this stuff, which is a sad testament to the Democrats.
State of affairs.
Yeah.
So what's your sense been of that, and what's kind of your thoughts been on this continuing escalation and totally like conflicting arguments and conflicting information, everything in between?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of thinking about the opposition, the Democrats in the 2024 campaign, but really for a long time, Obama kind of have allowed the Republicans to move towards pretending that they're the real anti-war party. It's a lane that should be so easy to take up after the huge failure of Iraq and the 20-year mess of Afghanistan. It should be easy to say, we are the anti-war party, no more endless war. Instead, you have people like J.D. Vance claiming that mantle while Palantir and makes money off of war and stuff. So the Democrats' biggest overall mistake, to me, is just their refusal to break with the military-industrial complex, their refusal to clearly be an anti-war party at all, other than a few, like the squad type people are more clear on that, but the majority are not at all. And then you have the leadership. I mean, the leadership of the party happens to be the worst of the bunch. You have Chuck Schumer being like, Trump's not tough enough on Iran, which is nuts.
Yeah, taco trucks. We got to put out taco trucks in opposition because he's not standing up to Iran. Yeah, that was a great tactic.
He's backing down, and then. So how can you criticize his bombing of Iran when you're the one who was sort of pushing him towards it? One of the people pushing him towards it, and then all they have to lean on because of the lack of a clear political or ideological stance against war, specifically, war that is largely for Israel and war that is, or attacks that are yet again in the Middle East. And because they're not opposed to that, they have to rely on this procedural argument about constitutionality and technically they're right. Of course, technically the president doesn't have this, but it's not new. It's been decades of that power sort of transferring from Congress to the executive branch and to the president. And it's another one of these things where voters want them to say no to endless war, no to using our money to bomb more civilians and bomb yet another country in the Middle East. Voters have the polling is very clear on that. I mean, a lot of Republicans flipped overnight. That tends to happen. What is not a compelling argument is you need to seek congressional authority before you go to bomb another country, before you technically engage in warfare. And then, so anyway, they don't take the clear stance. Instead, they have this weak procedural stance. And some of them don't even have that. Some of them are basically siding with Trump and saying, it was necessary to attack the nuclear facility. So yet again, it's almost exactly one of the similarities with the Zohran thing is one day Democrats are attacking Trump. The next day, they're sounding like their Republican counterparts and making the same arguments. And no wonder the approval rating for the party is, I don't know, 20% or whatever.
Or 20%. Yeah.
12, probably is 12 by now.
It should be. But yeah, I think what struck me so much about this is, first of all, aside from the Democratic topic, which I think is, this is very much in line with, it feels like we're just in a repeat of the Iraq war at this point, right? I was pretty young when that happened, but I could still remember feeling
some of those lines, some of the lies. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just full tilt, almost everybody, both sides of the aisle, full tilt on not only the war propaganda, but just basically, lies about basic facts, right? Like Fetterman and a few of them came out, which Fetterman, I don't know if you want to call him a Democrat. I think a lot of them wouldn't at this point, but which is a low bar to set, and he still doesn't reach it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a matter of time. The clock's ticking before he does the
switch.
I'm an independent. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But him and Trump and several other Democrats and all that, they're still claiming that these attacks were successful, which I find extremely telling of the times as well, of like this era of reality is just whatever you say and say loudly and say repeatedly, and suddenly it's reality. Where our own intelligence and very international intelligence in general shows that that's not the case. It was basically like, there's like, I forget, I'm so bad at remembering Democratic politicians' names, but there's this kind of hawkish Democratic congressperson in one of these hearings with Hegseth that said, like, basically you did a bunch of big holes in the ground and you did a bunch of big explosions, but other than that, this accomplished nothing but spending millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And yet, like, as long as again, the point should be you shouldn't do this at all, but as long as you say that it happened, as long as you say you won, it's like mission accomplished over and over again. This is the backdrop. It just feels like we're in the Twilight Zone, or like or that time is not linear. It's cyclical at this point. It feels truly bizarre, just as like a bystander,
Yeah, I mean, total hallmark of reality in general, more and more, but especially the sort of Trump era of say whatever you want, just repeat it, and get your network of the Charlie Kirks and the Ben Shapiros, get them to repeat it. I appreciate your focus on the so-called opposition party, because the very, very least you can do if you're going to oppose Trump is oppose the narrative. If you're going along with the made-up narrative, then you got indie journalists or something being the only ones like telling the truth. I mean, luckily in this case, it's like the New York Times or whatever is saying, yeah, I think they set back the nuclear stuff like a couple months. Okay, like that's the
at
big,
best. Yeah,
we wiped out their program. Okay, they'll be back at it in 5 months or whatever. Which is like whatever. They've been, Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying Iran's like 3 days away from a nuclear bomb for 20 years or however long he's been at it.
For literally my entire lifetime. Since
was it 30 years?
Almost like
maybe?
Yeah, something around that. Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the Twilight Zone feeling. It's just the lies that I could have sworn I heard that 15 years ago. Yeah, it's the why did we invade Iraq? The UMDs, they got to be there somewhere under Saddam's palace or something. And then 8 years later, some journalists discover that there was nothing there at all ever. It's I mean, this is a slightly different topic, but you already we're sort of getting into this, is that part of the reason they need to say these lies again and again right now is that nobody's interested. Nobody wants this, and it's this, I've seen some people pose the question of like, before they at least felt they needed to manufacture consent. And now it sort of feels like Trump doesn't even really care if nobody agrees with what he's doing. His approval ratings are going down. The tariffs pissed everybody off. His approval on immigration has gone down because of these kidnappings and these masked, agents or whatever, the Gestapo guys. Everything's going through the toilet, and he just sort of, just hard to tell if they care, because, I don't want to be a doomer too much on this one, like we were last time we talked. But like,
that's how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, Trump definitely doesn't care about democracy. What I don't know is if he really thinks that he's going to successfully end democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad he's 80 or whatever he is at this point, but just in terms of, not saying anything about our influence. Dear president.
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, it's just some of the lies, the lies feel so weak, they just feel so, they went through the recycling instead of trying to find anything new and interesting. They just recycled the same shit.
Yeah, it's just reruns. Yeah, it's just phoning it in, because they know that
TV's all reruns these days.
Yeah, and it's literally like convincing no one that isn't already convinced, right? And
exactly.
And another element of this that I don't want to take too much more of your time. I appreciate you going over all this with me, but like another element of this that I think the reason why they I was looking this up today to have a few notes on this. We've been talking understandably about what's been going on between Iran and Israel and the United States since I think it was June 13th, since this has all been going on. And I looked it up to try to find the best numbers I could. But, we also know, and you know this as well, of all these aid massacres that have been going on in Gaza during the supposed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is, an Israeli and U.S. military contractor organization, basically, that, that's basically not that Gaza gets mentioned much by mainstream media. It does by print outlets a little bit, like Reuters or something like that, or AP occasionally. But, it has been hair on fire coverage in favor of us going to war with Iran through CNN, Fox News, MSNBC to a lesser extent, but like New York Times, Reuters, again, AP News, all this kind of stuff. Hundreds and hundreds of hours, hundreds of pieces, like wall-to-wall coverage. And then you see barely a blip. Like it's like so insignificant if you try to like throw it up on a graph or anything to even see it, to see these people's like reporting on this, of over 1,000 Palestinians at least have been massacred at these aid, quote unquote aid locations that even the UN, the UN has been calling basically like death traps, and I'm not a overly I don't think these people are intelligent a lot of the time. I think people give them way too much credit when we go into deep conspiracies on things. But it's obvious that the hair on fire coverage, as much as it's also salivating for another war, it's also to distract from the fact that we set up these distribution things. People pretend like it's a good thing when we all see the information detailing where this organization is coming from. And then at least 1,000 additional Palestinians are killed from June 13th to now. And I would say that number is, of course, an undercount, as we see all the numbers tend to be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I don't really have too much of a question there, other than what have your kind of thoughts been on overall coverage of that, and just kind of where this is going as far as just actual escalation of violence, along with the media coverage and failure to do the most basic aspect of their jobs.
Yeah, it's just the levels of depravity with this system of consistently luring starving people with the promise of food and desperately needed food and supplies. That's hard. Yeah, it's hard to know what to say about that. It's just so, you mentioned dehumanization earlier as the foundation for a lot of right-wing politics and capitalism, but it's so present here, and the fact that it's this private organization that it feels like it really puts all the worst elements together. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it makes me think of is among the many lies told by MAGA and whatnot, and that again, the Democrats can't really stand up against these lies because of how Biden did everything Israel and Netanyahu wanted for his entire presidency. But just the fact that Trump is sort of pretended that he was going to do something different, and then just no withholding of money, no withholding of bombs. And Netanyahu says basically we need to attack Iran, and okay, we're bombing Iran now. And he sent a Truth Social that was saying they need a ceasefire, and then they didn't really uphold the ceasefire, and
told them that they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. That was big news.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
He's
so it's very Trumpian to be willing to say some wild stuff, or some stuff that's different. He talks like an outsider and then acts like an insider, basically.
Right.
And look, it's hard for me to say anything remotely positive about Trump, but saying some shit to talking badly about Israel in any way, but from the president of the United States, is rare, extremely rare for my whole lifetime. And so I'm glad that happened, but obviously we need action. We need Israel to be cut off instead of this basically continued total complicity and participation in the genocide. And yeah, this is a sad thought, but gotta laugh a little bit once in a while. When there's 12 fucked up things happening, I don't know what's the distraction from what.
Yeah. Seriously.
And it's all, really it's all part of the same big, gigantic clusterfuck that is our reality right now. But yeah, it's maybe accidentally tying it back to some of the beginning stuff, is that there just needs to be another level of organizing against the Trump regime, and, shout out to people in their courageous fight. And then people in New York with this electoralism, like it's, they're different fights in some ways, but it's all, I'm always happy when I see people getting organized and fighting back and rising up, and taking, agency, not waiting. I'm not trying to wait till the next presidential election. I'm just trying to do stuff in my community right now. Whether it's, raising funds for Palestine, trying to, participate in BDS, trying to, build like we need a peace movement. We need an anti-war movement because obviously Democrats, like we talked about, aren't going to have us on that one. So all the above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, when 12 different fucked up things are going on, you don't know what's a distraction from what. And that also gives an opportunity of 12 different ways to organize and fight against something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I know like this topic is one of those things that like I try to talk about as much as I can, and sometimes you don't know what words to say because you don't see anything better happening or coming about. Like literally, like one of the things that I looked at today, you see these screen grabs over and over and over again from different people that'll get them from legacy media outlets. Like the latest New York Times article about Gaza came out yesterday, and the headline is "The Lethal Risk of Seeking Food in Gaza." That's their headline concerning these people getting massacred, right? So that kind of shows where dehumanization is at the forefront of so many of these different things. The imperial boomerang that you reference in your piece on the endless wars, and also like the LA protests and some places that have, got violent and things of that nature. That is the imperial boomerang of like if they're going to dehumanize people halfway across the world and destroy their livelihood, those same things, and literally like the NYPD and different organizations like CPD in Chicago work with Israel and get these tactics from Israel. Like it is all connected, and that's why it's good to find solidarity with people to organize and not just do it for an election, as great as this was, but to find it as a moment to galvanize people to stay activated and motivated and put pressure on rather than the opposite, right? On that note, thanks so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate your time doing this. It's always fun to talk with you, especially as someone who likes to read your pieces and support your work. I really do enjoy going over these things with you and getting your insights. One last thing, and then I'll just have you plug where people can find your work. Is I would love for you to plug what you're doing now with raising funds for creating a community space as well in New York. That I saw your piece on that a little bit, just kind of what you're doing there and how people can support that and support your work.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that opportunity. So in New York, part of the Zohran campaign is space is hard to come by. Stuff's expensive. It's really, I mean, so many organizers and organizing I've done is it's hard to find a place to meet. It's hard to find a place to gather, to get to know your neighbors, and especially without paying a bunch of money. And so some people I know have created a space in Brooklyn called Another World. If you're on, Instagram, it's Another World BK. And it's movie nights, fundraisers, just a spot for community groups to sit and have their organizing meetings. Barbecue out back in the summer, and just free clothes in there, free COVID tests, free tampons, like snacks, books. So it's a lot, people trying to do a lot. And so I was grateful that, some of the readers of my newsletter have now contributed to it. And we're able to put, another couple $100 into the coffers of the community organizers over there. I mean, it's funny, really, I didn't even think about it with the Zohran campaign, but it really is, so much of this is about just like, can we afford to live in our neighborhoods? Can we afford to get together, to hang out? When winter comes around in New York, a lot of organizing gets tough because we no longer are we're not meeting in the parks in January. And so, we're glad to have a space through the winter. And thanks to everybody who already supported it. And if you're in Brooklyn, check it out, especially, Central Brooklyn. And real quick, the newsletter is called New Means on Substack. And I try to write once or twice a week over there. I just try to figure out what's going on in this crazy world and hopefully try, ideas for plugging in everything that we've been talking about today. Just how do we plug in and in a sustained way, in a way that's, what can I do day in and day out, not wait around for the next vote, and just get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do appreciate the kind of political commentary you do there, because so much of political discourse is through microblogging websites. It's a very flash in the pan. It's very got to get controversial. It's very surface level. It's like the fast food of political insight. And so I do appreciate when people like yourself and, many others that might do it through a video format or through another Substack, do it in a lot more long form way. So again,
Yeah, thanks, man.
Joshua P. Hill, New Means, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this with me. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Thanks for talking.